Okay, so we all hear about politics every day, and like we know why it's important because it ultimately is what controls the government. The government is like what controls our lives, like our politics. Just like the recent presidential election, ultimately is like the biggest thing that we see in the country on a span of every 4 years. And once again, the reason why politics are very important is because the laws they make that can influence our lives on a daily basis. But there are certain people out there that deal with these laws. They actually have a profession that studies these laws, and this is important because this basically determines like our status as a democracy and how we live our lives. And there is a career out there that does this, and this is known as policy analysts. These people that like analyze policies and determine the impact they have on people in their everyday lives. So ultimately, my thesis today is that policy analyst is a career that involves communication, where they basically study these policies and study what kind of impacts they have on our lives. And this basically involves communication, in a sense, a more mass communication instead of interpersonal communication, because it ultimately basically is how we think of presidents, is how like the mass media does these things, is how they basically advertise what's going on. So this is ultimately why policy analyst is very important, because the mass media aspect of it involving communication, where basically like there are hierarchies where people such as the president and people in news outlets like report these things and do these things, and ultimately it trickles down the pyramid to where us as ordinary citizens that make up the democracy are the ones that are affected by this. This is why policy analysts or policy analysis is an important career. And there's basically 3 points today that I would like to make to basically like what policy analyst is. First of all, it's going to be the definition of policy analysis. Second of all, the application, and third of all, like the implications of the career. So now back to the first main point I'd like to bring up today is the definition of policy analysis. Policy analysis basically is the communication related area I'm studying, and it's the career of studying policy and the effects that like our government and the laws our politicians make have on our everyday lives. So policy analysis is closely aligned to a study of a particular law, and they're expected to conduct studies like such as the Affordable Care Act on how they affect people, how they benefit people, how they hurt people, and many of these laws that are in place, they do studies on this, and this determines ultimately like how we are going to be affected as a democracy, how voters are going to choose the next president, the next politicians in place that like make policies that affect our everyday lives. So basically now to explore what applications come with policy analysts, my second main point is the applications of policy analysis. Like several benefits come out of this profession, such as gaining education on laws, such as gaining education on basically how the government works, how policy works. But however, there are some barriers that are in this profession, such as having difficult work, having to basically go out and study these policies. Sometimes they're not the most clear thing in the world. It can be hard studying these, and it can be very hard to even get basically a career in policy analysis, because once again you have the possibility of not being hired, because with like all professions we're basically a supply side economy, and dealing with economics, like if there are already a number of people in a job, then there is a likelihood that people aren't going to get hired if there's not spaces for people to be hired. So now basically on to my third point. This is going to be the implications of the career. So first of all, to have a career in this, I would likely need to have a political science degree, as well as having an education that qualifies me to do work. Like for example, I would need a bachelor's degree to get in college, obviously, and in college I would likely need to study something such as political science or legal studies or something closely aligned with that, since I would have a job involving political science, involving the government, because ultimately I would just be studying how the government works. So in addition, like being a debater, like being a policy debater, I'm currently debating policies. This would give me a good background on studying policies later in life. So not only by majoring in political science, but also being in the activity of speech and debate, this can prepare me for maybe being a policy analyst one day if I would like to go into that career that specifically involves communication. So knowing that a well-paying career is basically interesting, and that area is interesting to me, then I would basically be motivated to have a career in policy analysis, since I'm having an education that prepared me to do that, and being in the activity of speech and debate or forensics that basically is a prerequisite to that. Since I'm already researching policies and debating policies against students from other schools, this would be once again a great stepping stone to maybe one day having a career in policy analysis. So with this in mind, I believe being a policy analyst is a goal worth pursuing. So basically, in review, I've showed you what policy analysis is, what it is for, and why it's important. So in summary, basically because policy analysis inform the public of like what the implications of laws are, how they affect people, and how they affect our democracy, it's an important career worth exploring. And since I'm already having a background in that, and since I'm pursuing an education in that, and it involves communication through mass media, because it basically trickles down the pyramid of our politicians to the people in media down to the ordinary voters of our democracy, it once again does involve communication. So with that being said, policy analysis is a noble field that I'm striving to possibly explore a career in that involves communication. So I hope you have learned exactly what policy analysis is, what the implications of it are, and basically how it works. So with that being said, I hope you're very informed by this today, and this ultimately is what policy analysis entails.